The Aston Martin DBS Superleggera came out around 6 or 7 years ago now, and when this car was new, it cost £225,000, and with some options, you were looking at £250,000. But now, if you go onto Auto Trader, you can pick up a used one from as little as 120 grand, which got me thinking. The new Aston Martin Vanquish has just come out, and that costs upwards of £330,000. So, before you buy one of them, should you be looking at one of these?
Yep, it's the big boy Aston, and like every great British Grand Tourer, it's been hit by big depreciation. You can now pick up Gaydon's flagship GT car for roughly 50% off, and for the money, you get one of the most gorgeous cars of the last decade, with a thumping 715 brake horsepower from a twin turbocharged 5.2 litre V12 engine. 0 to 62 miles an hour takes just 3.4 seconds, and it will top out at 211 miles an hour, so you're also getting big speed. Sure, not everyone can just cough up 120 grand, but if you can, you might just be getting the bargain of the century. Now, let's see what it's like.
Listen to this. Sounds lovely, and this is a nice bit of road that I've just discovered. Look at this. So to drive, this thing is an absolute hoot. So the dry weight is sub 1700 kilos, so with fluids we're probably looking at about 1800, but it feels really light on its feet. Funnily enough, I drove a manual DBS a few weeks ago, and one of the things I really enjoyed about that car was, again, how light on its feet it felt and the fluidity with which it went down a road. And I wouldn't say this feels as agile as that thing did, but it's still, for a big GT car, this thing handles remarkably well. And you can definitely, from a driving perspective, you can definitely see the lineage. Out front, we've got a twin turbocharged 5.2 litre V12 engine, making 715 brake horsepower and 664 foot-pounds of torque, and the power's all the way up at 6,500 RPM, but the torque comes in from as little as 1,800 RPM, so you really, first of all, you get the torque load down, so you've got loads of mid-range, but because the power's up nice and high, it encourages you to chase down the limiter, which in this car is about 7,000 RPM, and it also sounds really good as well. On the steering wheel here, we've got these driving mode selectors, so one's for the powertrain and one's for the damping. So we've got a Sport, well actually it's GT mode, Sport, and then Sport Plus, and then we have the equivalent here for the damping as well. So the setup that I've found, that I really like actually, is the damping in GT, because it gives you some extra compliance on a bumpier road surface, but with the powertrain in Sport Plus, because you get the throttle response, and yeah, this thing is properly rapid, 0 to 62 in 3.4 seconds at a top speed of 211 miles an hour. And might I remind you, you can buy one of these for 120,000 quid. That is a lot of performance, a huge amount of performance for the money. I've spoken at length about the sporting credentials of this DBS, but it's a GT car, so I should really talk about that aspect of the DBS. And let me tell you, this does the whole GT car thing perfectly well. This is what it was built for, right? Long-legged cruising. There's really not much wingle road noise that makes its way into the cabin. It's a nice place to spend time. You can do long journeys in this thing, no problem whatsoever. The seat's really comfortable. The sound system's good. It's just a really pleasant place to be. And Aston Martin are the best at this. This kind of combination of driving dynamics and long-legged prowess. There's no other manufacturer that really does it like Aston Martin does. You could argue Bentley make incredible GT cars, and they do, but they're more luxurious cars and a little bit less sporty than what Aston does. So it's different strokes for different folks really, but for me right now, if I wanted to buy a GT car, I think I would be looking at an Aston Martin for sure. Are there any weak points in the package? I'm not entirely sure, you know. The 8-speed ZF gearbox isn't the snappiest, but it's not too bad actually. Yeah, they're pretty sharp, it's not too bad. What I would say, it's a nice gearbox for just getting around in, which is also important in a GT car. It should be usable. It feels quite big on the road, but when you get some speed beneath it, it does sort of shrink around you a little bit. And I would say the low speed ride quality can get a little bit jiggly, but again, once you've got some speed underneath the car, the damping really comes into its own, so it's not really a problem. You could comfortably, and I know this is very cliche, but bear with me, you could comfortably go to the south of France, find an amazing driving road, have fun, come home again. It really is one of those types of cars. In terms of the cabin, one of the criticisms of this particular generation of DBS was the Mercedes switchgear hanging around. Now, it is a nice cabin, it's very well made, and the materials on display are very lovely, lots of leather, but yeah, there is a bit of murk hanging around here. But again, when this thing was new, maybe you could complain about it, but for 120 grand, you can't. So I think that matters less now. And I actually had one of these on test about 4 years ago. It was a Volante, and my main criticism with the car actually were these really flimsy air vents. They feel really plasticky, but again, the car's now half the money, so as far as I'm concerned, that is half the problem that it used to be. There's something about this Superleggera. Superleggera, by the way, means super light, and there's just, it's more than the sum of its parts, this car. There's just the way it gets down the road, the combination of the steering, there's a little bit of roll in the chassis. You give it a little bit of throttle mid-corner and the rear comes around to meet you. The ride quality, the way it just sort of glides over some of the bigger undulations. There is a cohesiveness, if that's even a word, a cohesiveness to the way that this car does things, and it feels really effortless as a result. And that makes it a very compelling and very confidence-inspiring driving experience. I know a McLaren 720S isn't a direct comparison for one of these, but I want to make a point. That's a car that we've spoken about for a lot of years now in terms of a value prospect. Like, you can get an early one, again, for about 110, 120,000 quid. And I think there's a lot of people out there that will now be looking at 720Ss and DBS Superleggeras and saying to themselves, that's very interesting, which one should I get? I've driven both cars, and I'm quite happy to say that if I had 120 grand and I had to pick between those two cars, I think a few years ago I would have said a 720S, but today, 33-year-old Mark wants a DBS Superleggera. I think this is just such a complete package. Why would you not want it? It's an Aston Martin, it's beautiful, it's very fast. Okay, it's not the driver's car that a McLaren is, but this does a really great job of being dynamic, and you get all the other luxuries involved with it as well. Yeah, this is I think I might be aging a little bit now. I never thought I'd say I fancy an Aston Martin over a McLaren, but here you go. Shout out to my mate Daryl for letting me come and drive this for the day. I hope he doesn't mind me saying, but he paid £150,000 for this about a year ago, and this is on a 21 plate as well, so this isn't even one of the early examples. I reckon he's had an absolute steal here, because for the money, this is one hell of a car. So if you're in the market for a new Vanquish, should you be looking at one of these first? Well, obviously not, because if you can afford a new Vanquish, then why wouldn't you, right? However, if you can't afford a new Vanquish and you're very disappointed about it, don't worry, because you can pick up a 6-year-old Aston Martin DBS Superleggera for £120,000. And let me tell you, this is all the GT car you will ever need. This thing is a really lovely car, really, really lovely. And if you can pick one of these up, you're going to be laughing. So that's my top take here. Can't buy a Vanquish? Don't worry about it. You'll do just fine with one of these.